NRL Fantasy Round 5 buy, hold, sell. I'm Lawrie, your host here, previous NRL Fantasy winner, 2013 champ, here to help you with your Round 5 selections. And we've got Biz here too, who's a perennial top 500 finisher. Now, Biz, you had a monster score last week. How'd you go?
Yeah, I had a sweet 1,055 odd this week. A lot of things happened and fell my way. Jumped a lot of ranks. I was about 2-3K before this round, and now I'm in the top 250. Hoping to push into the top 150, 100 this week and consolidate my position. How about yourself?
Absolutely huge, mate. I wasn't as good as you. I was in more of that mid to high 800s. So I had a Luke Garner disaster at the start of the weekend that sort of set the tone for me, but he'll be out this week for one of the guys we're talking about here. So let's jump right into it. Cash cows first up. Jackson Ford. He's a guy that I had a bit of doubt about with Josh Curran on the bench, but he has proven himself the genuine sort of starting edge-back rower for the Warriors. $383,000 too. His price was stunted by that concussion game. So if you don't have Jackson Ford, you've only missed out on about $40,000. Definitely a buy this week.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've had mixed views on him over the last few weeks. I've been high on Ford. Longie's been a bit mixed, but like Lawrie said, he's only gone up 40K because of that concussion. So get him in. He should be one of your highest priorities. He's playing 80 minutes. He's got high work rate. Look for a 45 average and dual position.
Amen. Now, Jack Bostock, what do you think?
Yeah, so Jack Bostock, he's won the wing position for the Dolphins this week with Tessie New missing 4 to 6 weeks with the MCL injury. Look, I don't know too much about Jack Bostock other than he was a young gun for the Steelers. He's moved across to the Dolphins now. He scored a try in both of his games in the preseason challenge, and he's actually playing center for the Dolphins feeder side in the Host Plus Cup. He's scoring about 25 to 30 there, so I'm actually not expecting too much from him. But at the 230K base point, even if he can, get a game where he's scoring 2 or 3 tries, he could actually rocket up in price. I mean, just look at some of these other wingers, and you've got Khan-Pereira at the bottom there, which we'll get to. But look for him to make some cash for the next 4 to 6 weeks, and could get the dual position as well. Unlikely, but let's see how it goes. But yeah, he's in my team this week for a cash injection. Just speaking of other cash cows here, you've got Brendan Hands, who's another option this week.
Yeah, Hands is interesting. Look, he had a game for Parramatta this week where he came off the bench for Josh Hudson. 27 tackles in 32 minutes. He's produced a lot of tackles in reserve grade as well, and he's usurped Mitch Rain as that backup hooker at Parramatta. The thing with Hands is you're buying him probably not for his current role. Like in his current role, he'll score decently enough, but you're sort of buying him more for the eventuality that he starts to take over from Josh Hodgson. So whether that's through form or through injuries or through both of them playing on the field at the same time with the lack of middle forwards for Parramatta, you're sort of buying him for that upside there. And I think you can get him now for 256K. It's pretty safe that he's probably going to get to 400K at some point this season. So not a bad option, really good buys. Might even slip in as that backup half if a half was to go down too. Next guy here, Khan-Pereira, 304,000. Interesting guy to talk about. Now, we're not saying he's a buy at this stage, but more pointing out the fact that with these base price guys, so talking about Jack Bostock, we talked about Will Warbrick previously as well, talking about Khan-Pereira. With the base price guys, you kind of have to hang on until there's a bounce or a dropping. So with Khan-Pereira, he had to score a 0 at one point. He was looking like a real plotter, but he was in a lot of teams, and smart coaches hung on to him until that upside came through. And he's come through with some massive scores. So a decent score last week, but about 60 points this week. Bounced up to 304,000. You're probably going to get to about that sort of low to mids 400s, I would say, with Khan-Pereira. So yeah, just a bit of a lesson in that if you're cashing in up to someone, you probably have to hang on to them until there's a real reason to trade.
Yeah, absolutely. And the one thing I want to add there is, especially for like wingers, because they can score big any given week just on the back of 2-3 tries, and that just gets the ball rolling for about 150K of price rises. With that same logic, we're looking at the next bloke here, Jonah Pezet, who's playing for the Melbourne Storm at the moment. Now, he's an interesting one. He's obviously not their 6 or the 7 when Hughes and Munster are available, but both of them during the rep period, especially Munster and Pap being quite injury prone these days and still a while away. Melbourne are a team that lose a lot of players to Origin, so look for him to play bits and pieces roles throughout the season. And a good example of this is not 2022, but in 2021, I had picked up Hynes at a similar time of the season at base price, just knowing that we'll get 1 or 2 games during the Origin period, and he'll cover me for buys, and then he just ended up filling a role for like 4 or 5 weeks straight, and he made about 200, 300K, and they just didn't drop him, and they kept him at fullback for Pap over the whole season pretty much, and he was a gun buy. So we're not saying he's going to recreate that success, but if you need a cash out and you just don't need them to play every week, but they can fill in here and there and make some cash over 5 to 10 weeks, he's a good pick, and he's playing really well at the moment.
Upside of Hynes, downside of cash out. Sounds decent enough for him.
I'm not saying upside of Hynes. Please don't buy him on my advice thinking he's going to be Hynes.
Hynes. We're going to go to Hynes soon as well. So, are we saying Pezet or Hynes is the big decision for this week?
Yeah, pretty much. And I'd go Pezet. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Let's go mid-ranges here next. So, look, these are sort of defined as the guys between about $400,000 and maybe $650,000. Zach Hosking is the first guy here. And look, Biz and I were both at the game live as Parramatta fans. Hosking was very effective in that game. Massive defensive work rate, effective line runner. Obviously, he picked up some attacking stats there too. A big 94 points for him. Still $541,000. We look at the team list this week, and Scott Sorensen is the other starting edge back row. So you've got no Luke Garner, you've got no Liam Martin. How do you feel about Hosking, Biz? If you had the trades and you had maybe no other priorities, would you grab Hosking?
Oh, absolutely. I'm getting him in this week. He's got a low break even following that 94. So even if he scores, he's averaging about 68 when he's playing 80 minutes of back row. Now, let's be realistic. He's not going to average that over the course of the season. But even if he comes up with a 55, which is very doable, he seems to score 35, 40 in tackles and then 150 meters a week. He's a bit of an offloader. So, 55, he's making a 75K. I've had some questions from viewers just asking, what if he gets dropped for Garner again the week after? Well, if you get him at 540 and he jumps 70K at 610, you've got a lot of options to trade him out to. And frankly, based off the last performance, it wouldn't make too much sense for me to see Garner coming straight back in. Garner had a great round 2, but he was hooked in week 1 for a lazy performance. So Hosking's a great young talent. So, the risk of missing out on a guy who's just going to score 55, 60 each week at 540K is too much for me. I'd rather just trade him out next week if I have to. The one thing I do want to note is that it's very strange, but when you look at his reserve grade stats, he kind of averages in the high 40s and not the high 50s like he is in first grade. Mm-hmm. Now, that could be just overreading and overlooking into things, but don't let that stop you. He might be just a guy who, when he plays first grade, just his work rate goes up. He's in the atmosphere, and he's just in such a great Penrith team. You can just get attacking stats out of anywhere for this team. So get on him. Move what you need to get him in. Don't sell. I've seen some people who want to trade out Cam Murray to get him. Don't do that, but get him in if you can move some mid ranges or cash out some guns. Like, for example, I'm cashing out Trindle to get him in this week.
Yeah, because there are worlds where he could be $750,000 in a month's time, So, yeah, he's a great buy. The next few, the next one here is a little dodgier. And we're going to talk about a few center wings or centers and, I guess winger fullbacks there. Timoko, $531,000 is one that's made a bit of a leap this year. We throw him in because there's a lot of people talking about Matt Timoko. Personally, for me, if I was tossing up a center here, I'd prefer Connelly Lemuelu for $466,000 over Timoko. You're saving about sort of $65,000 there. You're getting a better scorer in my eyes as well. But Timoko is a guy that's made that leap. So if you're in a draft league where you can maybe make a trade for him, or you really are just desperate for an option, you have everyone else here, Timoko could be a good one. Now, Biz, I know there was a few other centers and wingers that you were looking at as well.
Yeah, speaking about centers who have taken the leap up, at least in a fantasy perspective this year, Will Penasini is another one. Now, he hasn't done too much attacking damage for Para this season yet. He's not gone on a try-scoring raid or anything like that, but he's just plugging in 45 to 50 scores, and it's really just coming from increased work rate, both in defense and with the ball in hand. He's taking a lot of runs, and he's a known offloader, and he's a tackle buster. He's a big bopper. And, Parramatta draw is going to ease up a lot following this Roosters game. They've got a few easier games on the back of a tough start to the season. So Penasini is another expensive mid-ranger type, but he's going to be a pod in your team that can really catapult you in the ranks, especially because there's no real good centers out. But, yeah, in saying that, Connelly would still be my number one pick for a center. If you need to go out and get a center this week, it's still Connelly for me.
Totally agree. And then there's another guy we were talking about before recording too, Greg Marzu, who posted a massive performance for the Knights. For me, Greg Marzu isn't a guy to prioritize. He's a winger on the Newcastle Knights. We don't know when Kalen Pong is going to be back. We don't think that they're going to win a lot of games this year. They got up against Canberra, but I just don't think he's going to get the attacking opportunities to be worth it as a buy over some of these other guys we're talking about, especially when he's the same price as, say, Zach Hosking here. Would you be recommending grabbing Marzu, or are you thinking?
No, I would stay away from him. I think, he's the type of guy who can just go on a hot run of scores, but I'm not paying that much for a winger in a poor team, as good as he is. And, look, I don't want to bar off Knights wingers. I mean, they dropped a guy like Dom Young, who's so talented after one or two poor efforts. I don't even know if Marzu is going to keep his spot because he's prone to defensive lapses, and I'm not sure how tolerant they'll be to that as the season goes on.
Yeah, he has been dropped before. Now, to a guy who's much more solid in his position, Charles Nickel-Klogstad, $418,000. He had that injury where he missed a week, so he's a bit off people's radars. If you don't have CNK yet, at $418,000, he's posted scores in the high 40s and low 50s in his 2 games that he started at fullback so far and played the full 80 minutes. So for me, CNK is a guy where you can plug him in, you can rely on him as a wing fullback every week, and he's a guy that you could reach for if you don't quite have the budget for some of these other fancier wing fullbacks.
Yeah, absolutely. And he's just the one thing I'd say is Warriors just look infinitely better this year than last year. The whole team's playing pretty well, and CNK just playing with the level of passion I haven't seen for a few years, and he's just popping up everywhere. So he's going to get games where he's just on the back of the big forward pack, getting some offloads, looking for tries, just a high work rate at the back. Doesn't have too much ball playing ability, but in fantasy, if you're making run meter, just look at Lockie Miller, right? He's racking up 200 meters a game, 10 tackle breaks. If CNK can do like a lesser version of that, he's good value.
Yeah, Miller's even a guy we could talk about here. 555K. Probably not too late for him. Last guy, Luki, and I'll let you speak on Luki here, Biz.
Yeah, he's a great young talent who obviously had a bit of an injury-based season last year. He's going to be probably playing 50, 60 to potentially 80 minutes in the second row. At 448K, he's actually a really good scorer when he gets the minutes. He's probably one, in my eyes, you could wait and see a week. He still doesn't have the lowest break even, so he's not going to fly up 100K this week. But he's been touted as the future Tuaref to go opposite Nanai. So watch for him this week. I'd prioritize Hosking over him on the edge, but he's a mid-ranger that can easily move up to 600K plus over the next few weeks. Probably going to be a longer burn, actually, to be honest, more like 4 to 6 weeks. But chuck him in your watch list for next week.
Yeah, and good buys as well. Like, he'll play that first major buy round. He's not going to miss any games before that. So the Cowboys players are not bad to have. Let's jump into the next section here. The big pods. These are some spicy options. These guys are risky, mostly. So these are guys where if you pick them and they go well, they could do a lot to catapult you in your leagues or catapult you up the overall rankings. But if they go wrong, it could be very bad for you. So we're prefacing with that here. For the pods, I'll start off here with Tyson Frizell. He had a very injury-affected first game, played about 15 minutes in that game, caused his price to drop. I think he's down about $80,000 on the year. So you're getting him at a big discount. And on the weekend, he posted about 70 points too. So admittedly with a try there, but Tyson Frizell's a guy who can score those tries. And at $614,000, if he doesn't get injured, you're probably getting a value guy there that you can rely on for a low to mid-50s average.
Yeah, I agree. And very similarly, Hudson Young's the same story. He's had a bit of a slow start to the year, and that's resulted in his price falling. He's not without risk as well. He's a bit of a hothead. He's had suspensions before, sin bins, send-offs, but he's a pretty strong player who has a knack of racking up tries, and he scored a try last week. Didn't really reflect in a massive score or anything, but he has shown he can score 2 or 3 tries pretty quickly and have those 80, 90 plus scores. And he's already lost about 100 to 150K this season. A lot of people are getting him in. He's a good option at that price, but he hasn't really shown too much this season. So I'm not really sure why there's been such a significant decrease in scoring talent. I would personally take Frizz over him. I think he's a better talent, both in real life and fantasy. And he's proven when he's not injured that he can average 55 plus over multiple seasons, whereas Hudson's only really done that in the recent year or so.
Let's throw to that recent year too. So he scored 14 tries last year. So I think he was top 10, top 20 try scorer last year. Number one in the back row position, but 14 tries for a back rower. I mean, he has 2 in 4 weeks this year, so he's kind of keeping it up, but I don't know if he can maintain that offensive potency, especially with the way the Raiders are playing this year. So he's a risky guy. I mean, he could be awesome if you grabbed him, but that's why he's on this risky pod list. Next guy we've got here is Jayden Brailey, and a similar price here, so same to Frizell, $614,000. Brailey's come down in price quite a bit. He's had, again, a few injury-affected games, but he posted a great score on the weekend. We can usually trust Brailey for a mid-50s type of average if he's injury unaffected, but he has had a lot of injuries over previous years, so that's one thing you have to keep an eye on. And the other thing to look at there too is the Knights forward pack is not as advertised this year. So they lost David Clemmer. They're running Jack Johns at lock this week. They haven't had Adam Elliott for a while. As a hooker there, if they're at full strength, I'd be feeling a bit more confident about him, but he's still value.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's got the pedigree when he had that run of scores of like where he was averaging 70 for half a season before slowing off. So I've seen a lot of people bring him in, and I think he's a good buy this week, especially because hookers, there's just not too many of them this season. And Tanner Boyd's on a buy this week, and the cheese has been pretty poor overall. So if you're lacking a Grant or a Cook or a Robson, then Brailey's a great option who could get you 55s over the next month or two before you can upgrade to the top tier.
Yeah, he's a juicy one. Blake Lawrie, you asked me to put Blake Lawrie in. I want to hear you out in this one. How do you?
Yeah.
What are you thinking?
Honestly, so when the Dragons extended Blake Lawrie this year, they kind of advertised him as the big retention, the big signing. I was a bit surprised by this. He's a decent player. To be fair, I haven't watched him that closely, but he's an aggressive, hot-headed player, but he's also really solid in terms of he doesn't miss tackles. He's got high work rate. He's playing 68 minutes this year, and he's averaging 55, and he's 615K, and he's the number one forward in that pack. Now, Jack DeBella not being there probably has an impact, but Laurie's just churning out big score after big score, and there's not as many great mids as previous years. You have your top tier guys like Murray and Haas and Carrigan, but then the mid range price, I'm really liking Lawrie. I think he can average 55 through the season, and for a big bopper, like he doesn't look like the fittest bloke, but he's definitely fit. He could probably continue this 70-minute role, and he's able to actually find the try line here and there, which is quite surprising. So, look, a lot of people are probably just not going to go to Blake Lawrie just based on previous years and probably how he looks. Like he doesn't look like a fantasy physique by any means, but if you need someone in that price bracket, and I would be going Lawrie. I genuinely think he can average 55 for the rest of the year. I've
seen a bit of debate between him and a guy like Eto'o Kamanu at a similar price, a bit cheaper. But yeah, no, I agree. Laurie's work rate and minutes have been much more consistent. And that 68 minutes last week, yeah, I see no reason why he couldn't keep going well. I mean, worst case scenario, you're getting him at what he's about worth. Best case scenario, you've got that upside. He's pretty juicy. I'd take some of those mid-ranges over him, but I wouldn't judge anyone for buying him. Last guy here, and the guy we have on the picture, Big John Bateman. $760,000 you're paying for him. He posted out a score in the 70s this week. He didn't have any major attacking stats in that score as well. It was up against the Storm, so he's a guy, I think he was 0.3% owned at the start of this round. It might have gone up since then, but he's a guy that is the most nuclear ultra pod that you can get. But if you grab John Bateman and then also maybe chuck the captaincy on him, you might be thinking, that could be an option that works. It could also blow up in your face. But like John Bateman has been a premier scorer every time he's been in fantasy. He was always that guy at Canberra. And there's no reason to believe why he won't be that guy at the Tigers. The other thing to throw in there is his defensive work rate in that game against the Storm was crazy. So he was chasing down tackles like there was no tomorrow. And yeah, I just think he's going to have a really solid base with some massively explosive games. And I'd be surprised if there aren't a couple of 100+ scores from him this year.
Yeah, and I think Tigers being garbage actually helps that because he's the type of player who takes so much pride in his work that you could physically see him trying to put the Tigers on his back last week. I was trying to get the ball, like you said, chasing tackles, offloading. He could average 65 plus if he plays like that because he offloads. Last time he played, offloads were only worth 2, and now offloads to hands are worth 4. And he's actually slimmed down a lot, so he looks fitter. So that could reap a lot of rewards for fantasy.
Yeah, he's a monster. Now let's jump to some of the guns here. So big guns, Shawnee Johnson first up, and then we get into the more expensive guys. For Shaun Johnson, we talked about him last week as a recommendation to buy. He was in our pods video as well. He's a guy that we've been recommending all through. He had a massive game because he hit those base points again, but for the first time this year, he really showcased some attacking stats with a try assist and a try in the same game, and he sort of showed what he can do in terms of upside. I think this is probably the last week that you'd be buying Shaun Johnson this year, 696K. Once he goes up another 40K, 50K, whatever it is next week, he gets into that 750K range and he stops being value for me. So if you're going to get Shaun Johnson, there are other guys that I'd be getting over him this week, but now is probably the last time that you can do it. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, I'm really happy that I got him in this week. I was kind of debating between him and Burden all the way up to when I was locked in for Adam Dewey. And then when I saw Burden kicking goals in the first few minutes of the Dogs-Warriors game, I was spewing that I went the wrong way. But you're right. Like Shaun Johnson this year, he's just making 20 points of kicks, 20 points of tackles. He doesn't miss many tackles like he used to. Like he's made about 100 tackles this season and missed about 3 or 4. And he just looks a much better defender. And so he's averaging 50-55 of base stats. And if you've been reading the articles in the press, the coaches come out and said they've designed structures in a way that will let Johnson run. Like, so they're planning the game plan for him to be in attacking situations. And even when he's passing the ball, he's running 5-6 meters and getting really deep into the line with creating space. So, yeah, but I completely agree. This is the last week because once it gets to the 750 mark, there's probably better options out there.
Yep, totally agree. Next guy who we've got is Isaiah Papli'i, 857K. We talked about him as a gun earlier in the season. He's probably a pod right now, to be honest. Not many serious coaches who would have held him through suspension.
Hey, I have him. Come on, I'm a serious coach.
Not many. That's why I say it. But hey, look, he's your pod, so I might let you speak on him and why you went him.
Yeah, look, it was simple. He's averaged about 60, 65 over the last couple of seasons. Everyone said he was at Para. They're a great side, coming to a pretty rubbish Tigers team. I generally thought Tigers would be good this year, and I think they're going to improve a lot as the season goes on, as the chemistry builds. But Papli'i is the type of guy who makes 35 tackles, 150 meters, and you don't need a team to be going well to get those stats. And then he offloads and forces turnovers and things like that in the way he plays. So a guy who had 5% ownership and can average 65 was a bit of a no-brainer for me. The other thing is he had a mixed role at Para. Like sometimes he'd play middle for 50 minutes, sometimes he'd play edge, sometimes he'd get 60, 70 minutes. So I was very confident being the marquee signing for the Tigers that he would play 80 minutes on the edge every week, no matter what. And he's averaging 62 this year. He hasn't scored a try. He hasn't gone gangbusters yet. He scored 78 last week, but it was more through turnovers and offloads rather than tries or try assists. He did get one try assist where Bateman crabbed across, gave it to Papli'i, and he found Capel in space. But yeah, Papli'i, like Cook, they're guys who average 60 to 65 every year and 5% ownership. I've got both of them. But so I've been hyping up Cook over the last few weeks, so I'll give it to someone neutral. And Longy, what are your thoughts on Cook?
Yeah, I mean, Cook's hot. Cook's price has come down a bit. So at 872K, he's much more palatable than when he was in the 900s. The thing about Cook is if he doesn't play Origin, which is not a certainty at this point, then he's serious value through the buys. He's got a great schedule at South. He's a guy that you can just plug in, you can rely on, you can captain through those buy periods. No, he's a great buy. My question to you, and I guess something we can chat about here, is at hooker, Reece Robson, Damien Cook, Api Coruscant. Who is the Blues hooker? Because Coruscant is one that he wasn't great against the Tigers, and he hasn't been great this year. Does that play in at all?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I can't see a world where Cook gets left out this year. to be honest. I think it's going to be probably Coruscant and Cook again, and Robson's going to be that 18th man squad player type role. Because I think just the Rabbits are playing really well this year, and Cook's just been solid. He hasn't set the world alight, but the Cook is the type of bloke that even when he's not playing exceptionally well, he's still good. Whereas Coruscant at times, he can be bad. Like he can miss 8-9 tackles in a game and not create too much offense. But Cook is just stable. Even if he's not busting the game open for you, he's still going to be really reliable. So I think Cook gets a spot for sure.
Yeah, so that's down to his fantasy value, but he's still a great buy this week at 872. Last guy here that we're going to talk about is Ryan Matterson. Now, Ryan Matterson came back last week. He had 68 points. He didn't have a single stat that wasn't a run meter or a tackle. 68 points with none of the upside we expect from Matto. Matto is one of the league's best offloaders. He's a guy who can score tries off cross-field kicks. He's a guy who can run a line. He's a guy who can put another player through a hole. You've got all those offensive upside points in a forward, but also the 68 base from pure base there. I think he's a bit of a no-brainer at 775k. And if you're going for a gun back row, I mean, there's so many good ones right now. We've talked about John Bateman as a pod there too. We've talked about Isaiah Papli'i, but Matto is just a monster. The other thing is his role. I mean, tell me, Biz, what you think about Matto's role going forward, and do you think he's going to start on the edge, come into the middle? Do you think he'll stay on the edge the whole game? What are you thinking there?
Honestly, my opinion is that it has zero implication for fantasy. He's super malleable. Like, he'll play anywhere. I'll do my little malleable dance for our viewers. But look, honestly, I think he's going to probably play a mixed role through the year, depending on what the Eels team looks like based on suspensions and injuries. Like this week he played edge because Shaun Lane's not there. This week he's named at edge again, and they've got Wiremu named at prop. I think it's probably going to be a late change where Matterson might play in the middle and Wiremu goes back to the bench. I don't think Wiremu's ever played first grade for more than 15 minutes a game, so I can't imagine he'll step into Paulo's role and play 60 minutes, but could be wrong. But yeah, look, Matterson, he's either going to play 80 minutes on an edge and score 60 points most weeks. He's going to play 60 minutes in the middle for 60 points most weeks. He's just going to average 60, and there's only real upside because last week he played 50 minutes on the edge and then he played 30 minutes in the middle. So that's why he had such an incredible work rate. And if he's doing that role through the season, then like this bloke could be in the top echelon of fantasy scorers. Like he could be the number one fantasy scorer over the year because he's got elite PPM in the middle, good PPM on the edge, combine both and playing 80 minutes, he could be 70 plus average scorer. So that, I think it doesn't really matter where he plays. Don't worry about his role. If you can get Matterson, get him in.
And the question is, who else is going to do it for Parramatta if not Matterson? Like we really don't have any other options there. So he has to be that guy for Para. One last thing before we go into Cleary Hynes. We've changed the format a bit this week, so we didn't go into the holds or the sells as much. But we can sort of go off the cuff here because there aren't that many sells. And the holds are pretty self-explanatory this week. But for sells, let's throw a few out there, Biz, off the cuff. I mean, if you have Luke Garner, I'm thinking he is a very hard sell. He showed some potential in PPM, but yeah, he's a guy you got to get rid of. I think Matt Dury at this point, just because there's so many good options. If you have Dury and you don't have Ford, for example, that trade makes sense. So I'd get rid of him. I think Jack Bird is one we talked about a bit. He's a hold at this point. You know, he came off the bench last week. It was a bit of a last-minute change. It did not work for the Dragons. He's back into the starting side, so you hang on to him. Do you have any other guys, Biz, that you're thinking of as firm sells at this point?
This is going to be an unpopular opinion, but I think if you've got Tanner Boyd on the bye this week, it's time to let go of him. I think he's coming off a good score, so it's a bit sacrilegious to say that. But we've covered so many good mid-ranges here. Like we've talked about Hosking, we've talked about Connelly at centre, we've talked about a bunch of these guys. And a Tanner Boyd, he's just inconsistent. I think there's just better options out there. I think a lot of people are just forced to keep him in this side because there's not much hooker coverage going on. But I'd be moving on with Tanner Boyd to a better mid-range option who can average 50 plus, like some of these guys, or who are in more effective positions like Connelly at center. So he's my sell of the week, ideally. I know a lot of people won't agree with me, but that's my opinion. In terms of holds, like don't sell for feeder because it's his buy round, etc. Like you saw what happened when people sold Cleary on his buy round. they're instantly regretting it next week when he's come out. He's bombed like a 78. Don't sell guns because they're missing a week. Is my I'm just stick to that. Look at Papli'i. Him still because of suspension. If you traded him out, he also came out and got 78. 1 week's missing for a gun, like just hold them at that point.
Words to live by there. Anyway, that's the buy, hold, sell for us this week. Look, Cleary v. Hynes is the last thing, but I think this has gone for a while. So we're going to make a separate video on Cleary v. Hynes, talk about those options there. If you like this content, we're doing this every week. We're doing heaps of fantasy stuff. So make sure to drop a comment in there in the trades that you're thinking of making, how you went last week. And let us know what content you want to see on the fantasy side. And make sure to subscribe too. Anyway, we'll see you on the next video.